They say in Red Bluff territory there are three kinds of storms: the kind that bring rain, the kind that bring snow, and the kind that bring change. Winter of 1891 brought all three. I was riding the mail route between Stillwater and Silver Ridge that season. 22 years I'd been carrying letters through those mountains, seen a lot of things, heard more, but I never saw anything like what happened between Jesse Dalton and Catherine Merrick. Some folks call it luck. Some call it providence. I call it what it was: a man doing right when nobody was watching, and a woman who remembered. My name is Samuel Brenner. I'm 62 years old now, sitting here in Lillian Price's boarding house on a winter evening, much like the one I'm about to tell you about. There's a young fellow across from me, reporter from Denver, come all the way out here to write about the legendary Merrick-Dalton partnership for some magazine back east. He's got his notebook out, pencil ready, expecting me to tell him what the newspapers said, what the dime novels printed. But I was there, I saw it, and I'm going to tell him the truth. Not the version where Jesse Dalton was some noble hero who never doubted himself. Not the version where Catherine Merrick was some ice queen who melted at first sight of a kind gesture. Real people are more complicated than that. More interesting, too. This is how it happened. From the saddle of a mail horse, riding between two worlds that should never have touched. And it started the week before Christmas, 1891, when the mercury dropped so low the thermometer outside Harlow's smithy cracked clean through. Stillwater wasn't much to look at, even in good weather. A single main street rutted with frozen mud, maybe 20 buildings, most of them rough timber that hadn't seen paint since they were built. The kind of town that exists because someone found water and someone else found a reason to stay. We had Harlow's stable and smithy on the north end, Lillian Price's boarding house on the south, general store in between, run by a Swede named Olofsson who kept his prices fair and his opinions to himself. A church that doubled as a schoolhouse when the circuit teacher came through. And a saloon that didn't have a name, just a sign that said whiskey in letters you could read from horseback. That was Stillwater. Hard country makes hard towns, and Red Bluff territory was as hard as they came. I rode through every Thursday, delivering what little mail came to folks who'd chosen to live on the edge of everything. Letters from families back east, mostly. Occasional business correspondence. Once in a while, something that mattered. A birth notice, a death certificate, a deed that changed a life. The Thursday before the storm, I delivered 3 letters to Stillwater. One to Lillian Price from her sister in Kansas City, one to Reverend Kohler, who was passing through, and one to the general store, a catalog from a distributor in Cheyenne. Jesse Dalton got nothing. He never did. The only people who might have written him were dead. I found him at Harlow's like always, December 20th, 3 days before the storm that would change everything. The smithy was the warmest building in Stillwater on account of the forge, and Jesse was hunched over it, hammer in hand, shaping a horseshoe, with the kind of steady rhythm that comes from doing something 10,000 times. He didn't look up when I came in. Most men would have. But Jesse had a way of staying focused on the work in front of him, like the world outside the forge didn't exist unless he gave it permission. "Afternoon, Sam," he said, not breaking rhythm. Clang, clang, clang. "Jesse," I stamped my boots to shake off the cold. "Nothing for you today." Didn't expect there would be. That was Jesse. No wasted words, no complaints about things he couldn't change. I watched him work for a minute. He was a solid man, Jesse Dalton, not tall, but broad through the shoulders, the way men get when they work with their hands their whole lives. Weathered face, lines around his eyes that could have been from squinting at the forge or from smiling, though I didn't see him smile much. His hands were scarred and calloused, knuckles cracked from the cold despite the leather gloves he wore when he wasn't at the anvil. He wore the same clothes every day, canvas trousers patched at the knees, wool shirt that had been gray once, faded now to something closer to no color at all, a leather apron scorched and stained from years of hot metal and coal smoke. He looked like what he was, a man getting by on just enough and nothing more. "Harlow keeping you busy?" I asked. "Busy enough." Clang, clang, clang. Marcus Harlow owned the smithy and the stable attached to it. He was a decent enough man, far as frontier businessmen went, paid Jesse hourly for shoeing horses and fixing wagon parts. Not much, but steady. In winter, when travelers still needed to move and horses still needed shoes, that steady work was the difference between eating and starving. Jesse set the horseshoe aside, thrust it into the water barrel. Steam hissed up, filling the smithy with the smell of hot metal and minerals. "How's the boy?" I asked. That got Jesse to look up, just for a second, but I saw something shift in his face, something softer. "Tommy's good, growing fast. Still with Mrs. Price during the day, when I'm working late. She doesn't charge much for watching him." Which meant Jesse couldn't afford much. I knew Lillian Price. She had a kind heart under all that frontier toughness, but she also had bills to pay. Whatever she charged Jesse was probably less than she should have asked for. "You heading home soon?" I said. Jesse pulled another piece of iron from the stack, examined it in the light from the forge. "Got 3 more shoes to finish, then I'll fetch Tommy." I nodded. It was near 4 o'clock already. Sun would be down in an hour, and the temperature would drop another 10 degrees after that. The walk from Stillwater to Jesse's cabin out at Copper Creek was about 3 miles. In summer, that was nothing. In December, with a child, it was something you didn't want to start after dark. "Storm coming," I said. "Day or 2, maybe." Jesse glanced toward the door, where gray light filtered through. I heard. "Big one, they're saying. First real blizzard of the season. We'll be ready." And that was Jesse. No fear, no fuss. Just quiet acceptance of whatever the world threw at him. I tipped my hat and headed back out into the cold. I didn't know it then, but that was the last normal conversation I'd have with Jesse Dalton for a while. 3 days later, the storm hit. It started as a whisper on the evening of December 23rd. I was at the way station south of Stillwater, bedding down for the night. The wind picked up around sunset, rattling the shutters, making the horses nervous in the lean-to. By full dark, it was howling. By midnight, it was screaming. A blizzard in the mountains isn't like a storm anywhere else. The wind funnels through the passes, gets trapped between rock walls, builds on itself until it's strong enough to knock a man off his horse. The snow doesn't fall. It attacks, coming at you sideways, blinding, suffocating. I'd seen men die in storms like that. Good men. Men who thought they knew the country well enough to risk it. I stayed put. I had blankets, a stove, enough food for 3 days if I needed it. The mail could wait. No letter was worth freezing to death over. But Jesse didn't have the luxury of staying put. Because Jesse had been in Stillwater when the storm hit, working late at Harlow's to finish a rush job. An ore wagon needed repairs before it could head to the railhead. By the time Jesse walked through the snow to pick up Tommy from Mrs. Price's boarding house, it was already too late to wait it out in town. Tommy was running a fever. Nothing serious, Mrs. Price said, just a winter cold. But Jesse didn't have money for a room at the boarding house, and he didn't have medicine at home. What he had was a cabin 3 miles away with firewood already stacked and a blanket that belonged to Tommy's mother, and in Jesse's mind, that's where his son needed to be. So he bundled the boy up, wrapped him in a wool blanket, and lifted him onto Dust, the old roan mare that was the only thing of value Jesse owned besides his tools. Mrs. Price stood on the porch and watched them go. "Should have stayed," she told me later, months after everything happened. I told him he should have stayed, but Jesse Dalton was stubborn as a mule when it came to that boy. Stubborn, maybe. Or maybe just a father who wanted his sick son in his own bed, in the place that still smelled like the woman who'd been Tommy's mother. Either way, Jesse rode out into the storm. Widow's Pass sits about 1.5 miles north of Stillwater, right on the trail that leads to Copper Creek. It's called Widow's Pass for a reason. Narrow trail, barely wide enough for a wagon, sheer rock face on one side, 100-foot drop on the other. Trees crowd in close. Pines so thick with snow in winter, that their branches hang down like arms trying to grab you. The wind funnels through there, something fierce, trapped between the rock walls, picking up speed until it sounds like the mountain itself is screaming. In good weather, you ride through careful. In bad weather, you don't ride through at all. Jesse didn't have a choice. He hunched forward in the saddle, one hand gripping the reins, the other holding his coat collar tight against his neck. Behind him, Tommy clung to his back, small arms locked around Jesse's waist, face buried between his father's shoulder blades. The boy hadn't complained once. Not about the cold, not about the fever making his head ache, not about the wind that cut through layers of wool like it was paper. He knew better. Winter in Red Bluff territory didn't care about complaints. Dust picked her way through the drifts, ears pinned back, head low. She'd been with Jesse 6 years, since before Tommy was born. She knew the trail even when you couldn't see it, knew where the rocks were, where the drop-offs started. Jesse trusted her more than he trusted most people. The snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, turning the world into nothing but white noise and cold. Jesse's hands ached despite the gloves. His face was numb. Ice had formed in his beard, crackling when he moved his jaw. But he kept Dust moving forward, kept Tommy secure, kept going because there was nothing else to do. Less than 2 miles from home. Less than 2 miles and they'd be safe. That's when Jesse saw it. A dark shape slumped against the base of a wind-twisted pine just off the trail to the left. At first, he thought it was a fallen branch, maybe a deer carcass left by wolves. But as Dust drew closer, the shape took form. A horse, black as midnight, legs folded beneath it, head drooped low. And beside it, half buried in the snow, a figure in a long coat. Jesse pulled Dust to a halt. His gut tightened. "Stay put, Tommy," he said quietly. The boy nodded against his back, clutching the blanket tighter. Jesse swung down from the saddle. His boots sank deep into the snow, and the cold hit him like a fist now that he wasn't moving. He approached slowly, each step deliberate. The black horse lifted its head weakly. Steam rose from its nostrils, exhausted but alive. The person beside it wasn't moving. Jesse dropped to one knee, snow soaking through his trousers. He brushed snow from a shoulder, a face, a woman. Her lips were pale blue, skin like wax. Ice clung to her dark hair. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was so shallow Jesse almost missed it. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm but gentle. He shook her shoulder. Nothing. He pulled off his glove, pressed 2 fingers to her neck, a pulse. Faint, but there. Jesse didn't hesitate, didn't stop to wonder who she was or what she was doing out here alone, didn't think about the storm or the miles still between them and shelter. Didn't consider the risk of taking on someone else's burden when he already had a sick child to protect. He just moved. He scooped her up in his arms, dead weight, heavier than he expected, her head lolling against his chest. Carried her back to Dust, who snorted nervously but held steady. Jesse looked at the trail ahead, 2 miles to the cabin. But now he had 3 people and 2 horses, and one of those horses was barely standing. He did the math in his head. Fast. Tommy was small, light. The woman was unconscious, couldn't hold on by herself. If he put her on Dust alone, she'd fall. If he put Tommy and the woman together, the boy couldn't support her weight. That left one option. Jesse shifted Tommy forward in the saddle, the boy's small frame pressed against the mare's neck. Then Jesse carefully positioned the woman behind Tommy, draping her limp arms around the boy's waist. "Hold her hand, son," Jesse said, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his lungs. "Don't let go." Tommy's eyes were wide, scared, but he nodded. His small fingers gripped the woman's frozen hands, holding tight. Jesse climbed up in front of them both, took the reins, and kicked Dust into motion. Behind them the black mare whinnied, a sound so raw and desperate it cut through the wind. Jesse looked back. The horse was trying to stand, front legs shaking, but something was wrong. The way she held her weight, favoring the right foreleg. Injured. maybe a stone bruise, maybe worse. Jesse made a decision. He couldn't leave her. The storm would kill her before morning, but he couldn't wait either. The woman in his arms was slipping away with every minute, and Tommy's fever was getting worse. "Come on, girl," Jesse called to the black mare. "Follow if you can." He turned Dust toward home and rode. The mare hesitated, then staggered to her feet. She limped after them, head low, each step an effort, but she followed. The wind howled louder. The snow came faster. Jesse's jaw clenched as he urged Dust forward, every step deliberate, every breath a fight. He could feel the woman's weight slumping heavier against Tommy's back. She was slipping away, and he knew it. Behind him, Tommy held on, small hands gripping frozen fingers. The boy was shivering now, fever and cold warring in his small body, but he didn't let go, didn't complain. "Almost there," Jesse muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the boy, the horses, or himself. His cabin was close now, just over the next ridge, just a little farther. The world had gone silent except for the crunch of hooves through snow and the rasp of his own breathing. In his arms, in his care, was a stranger whose name he didn't know. Behind him, a son whose trust he couldn't betray. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like his wife's, saying what she always said when times got hard. "Do what's right, Jesse. The rest will follow." He'd promised her that. Promised her he'd raise their boy to know what mattered. And what mattered was this: you don't leave people to die when you can do something about it. Jesse Dalton rode harder into the storm. The cabin broke through the wall of white like a miracle. It wasn't much to look at, a single-room structure built from rough-hewn logs, stone chimney, slanted roof barely keeping the snow from piling through. But right now, it looked like salvation. Jesse didn't stop until Dust's hooves hit the small clearing in front of the door. He dismounted fast, his legs nearly buckling when his boots hit the ground. Cold had seeped so deep into his bones he could barely feel his feet. "Tommy, get the door," he said, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. The boy slid down from the saddle and ran ahead, small boots kicking up snow. His hands shook as he fumbled with the latch, but he got it open. The door swung inward with a groan, and a gust of slightly warmer air spilled out. Jesse reached up and carefully pulled the woman down from the saddle, cradling her against his chest. She was heavier than he'd thought. Dead weight in his arms, her head lolling to one side. Her breathing was so faint, he had to press his ear close to her mouth just to be sure it was still there. He carried her inside and laid her gently on the narrow cot near the fireplace. The embers from the morning fire were still glowing faintly, just enough to cast a dim red light across the cabin. Jesse wasted no time. He grabbed 2 fresh logs from the stack by the door and threw them onto the coals, stirring them with the poker until flames licked up hungrily. "Tommy, grab every blanket we got," Jesse said, already kneeling beside the woman. The boy moved fast, gathering quilts and wool blankets from the corner where they slept. His face was flushed with fever, eyes bright and scared, but he didn't hesitate. Jesse pulled off the woman's soaked coat, heavy with ice and snow, fine wool that had probably cost more than Jesse made in a month. Then her boots. Her feet were pale, almost gray, frostbite settling in. He worked quickly, wrapping her legs in a thick quilt, tucking another around her shoulders. Tommy came back with an armful of wool blankets and a patchwork quilt, the one Jesse's wife had made years ago, before the fever took her. The colors were faded now, but it was the warmest thing they owned. Jesse draped them all over the woman, layering them carefully, then moved to the small stove in the corner. He filled a dented kettle with water from the bucket and set it to boil. His hands were shaking now, not from the cold but from something else. Fear, maybe. Responsibility. He'd pulled people out of trouble before. Helped a neighbor with a broken wagon axle. Carried an injured man back to town after a bar fight. But this was different. This woman was hanging by a thread, and if she didn't make it, it would be on him. "Is she going to die, Pa?" Tommy's voice was small, barely above a whisper. Jesse looked over his shoulder at his son. The boy was standing there with snow still melting in his hair, eyes wide and scared, shivering despite the fire. He wanted to lie, wanted to tell the boy everything would be fine, but Jesse had never lied to Tommy before, and he wasn't about to start now. "I don't know," Jesse said quietly, "but we're going to do everything we can." He poured hot water into a tin cup, added a pinch of dried mint from the jar on the shelf, and knelt beside the cot again. Lifting the woman's head gently, he pressed the rim of the cup to her lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but a few drops made it past her lips. Her throat moved, just barely. "That's it," Jesse murmured. "Come on now, stay with us." He set the cup down and rubbed her hands between his own, trying to coax warmth back into her fingers. They were like ice, stiff and unresponsive. He worked in silence, methodical, focused, rubbing her hands, checking her pulse, adjusting the blankets. Tommy crept closer, watching. "Can I help?" the boy asked. Jesse nodded. "Stoke the fire, keep it hot." Tommy moved to the hearth, carefully adding kindling, his small hands steady despite the fear in his eyes. The flames grew brighter, casting long shadows across the walls. The cabin filled with warmth, slowly, painfully, slowly. Color began to seep back into the woman's face. Her eyelids fluttered once, twice. Then her lips parted, and a soft, broken sound escaped her throat. Not words, just breath. But it was enough. Jesse exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. She was still here, still fighting. He sat back on his heels, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, and glanced at Tommy. The boy was watching him with something like awe. "You did good, son," Jesse said quietly. Tommy smiled, just a little. "So did you, Pa." Outside, the wind howled. The storm raged on, indifferent to the small miracle happening inside a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Jesse stood, his body aching, and moved to the door. He opened it a crack, letting in a blast of cold air. The black mare stood just outside, head drooped low, steam rising from her coat. She'd made it. Somehow, injured and exhausted, she'd followed them all the way. Jesse grabbed a rope from the peg by the door and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a wall, but he pushed through it. He led the mare around to the lean-to behind the cabin, the small three-sided shelter where Dust already stood, munching hay. Jesse tied the black mare next to Dust, rubbed her down with an old cloth, checked her injured leg. Swollen but not broken. She'd need rest, but she'd live. He threw a blanket over her back and made sure both horses had water and feed. Then he trudged back through the snow to the cabin. Inside, the warmth hit him like a blessing. He closed the door, latched it, and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. He'd done it. He'd gotten them all here, alive. Now he just had to keep them that way. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with a warmth that felt almost sacred after the brutal cold outside. Jesse sat in the wooden chair by the hearth, elbows resting on his knees, watching the woman on the cot. Her breathing had steadied, deeper now, more certain. The color had returned to her cheeks, faint but present, like the first blush of dawn over the mountains. Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor near the stove, stirring a pot of beans and salt pork that bubbled over the heat. He'd added a little water to stretch it further, the way his father had taught him. It wasn't much, but it was hot, and that mattered more than flavor tonight. Jesse hadn't moved much in the last hour. He'd checked the woman's pulse twice, adjusted the blankets around her shoulders, made sure her feet were elevated and wrapped. Now he just waited, hands folded, eyes tired but alert. He didn't know who she was, didn't know where she'd come from or why she'd been out on Widow's Pass alone in the middle of a blizzard. And, truthfully, it didn't matter. She was here. She was alive. That was enough. The woman stirred. A soft groan escaped her lips, and her head turned slightly on the thin pillow. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, revealing sharp gray eyes that blinked in confusion at the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Jesse sat up straighter, leaning forward. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and calm. "You're safe." Her gaze shifted to him, wide and disoriented. She tried to sit up, but her body didn't cooperate. Jesse reached out gently, a hand hovering but not touching. "Don't push it," he said. "You've been out cold for a while, nearly froze to death." She stared at him, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the rough log walls, the stone fireplace, the boy stirring a pot in the corner, then back to Jesse. "Where?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Copper Creek," Jesse said, "few miles south of Stillwater. Found you on the trail, half buried in snow. Brought you here." She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, as if trying to piece together how she'd ended up in this place. When she opened them again, there was something sharper in her gaze. Not fear, but recognition, maybe, or disbelief. "My horse," she said suddenly, trying to sit up again. Jesse gently pressed her shoulder back. "She's in the lean-to out back. Fed her, rubbed her down. She'll be all right." Favoring her right foreleg, but nothing broken. The woman sank back against the pillow, relief flickering across her face. Then she looked at him again, really looked, studying the lines around his eyes, the worn fabric of his shirt, the calluses on his hands. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Jesse shrugged. "Didn't seem right to leave you out there." She was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, "Most people would have." Before Jesse could respond, Tommy appeared at the edge of the cot, holding a chipped bowl of beans in both hands. His eyes were wide with curiosity, but there was no fear in them, just the innocent wonder of a child meeting someone new. "Pa said you were real cold," Tommy said, offering the bowl. "This'll warm you up." The woman's gaze softened. She reached out slowly, taking the bowl with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now. Tommy grinned. "You got a name?" "Tommy," Jesse said gently, a quiet reprimand. But the woman smiled, just faintly. "It's all right." She looked at the boy. "Kate. My name's Kate." Tommy nodded solemnly, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Tommy. That's my pa, Jesse." Kate glanced at Jesse again, something shifting in her expression. Gratitude, maybe, or something deeper. "Thank you, Jesse," she said softly, "for not leaving me out there." Jesse just nodded once, his face unreadable. "Eat up," he said. "You'll need your strength." And as the fire crackled and the storm outside began to fade, the three of them sat together in the quiet warmth of the cabin. Strangers no longer. Morning came cold and clear. The sky had been scrubbed clean by the storm, pale blue stretching from horizon to horizon without a single cloud. Sunlight poured through the frost-covered window, painting bright squares across the cabin floor. Jesse was already awake, pulling on his coat and boots near the door. He moved quietly, careful not to wake Tommy, who was still curled up beneath his blankets in the corner, snoring softly. The orange cat they'd found last month was curled against the boy's chest, a ball of fur and warmth. Kate stirred on the cot, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she seemed confused, then memory returned, and she sat up carefully, testing her body. The stiffness was still there, the ache in her bones, but the worst had passed. She was alive, and that was more than she'd expected yesterday. "Morning," Jesse said, glancing over. "How you feeling?" "Better?" Kate's voice was still rough, but stronger. "Much better." Jesse nodded. "Good. I'm going to check on your horse. Make sure she's ready to ride." He was already reaching for the door when Kate spoke again. Storms passed. Roads should be clear enough by midday. Jesse paused, hand on the latch. Something in her tone made him look back. She was watching him with those sharp gray eyes, and he realized she was testing him, seeing if he'd rush her out now that the danger had passed. "Your mare's got a stone bruise," Jesse said. "Maybe worse. She needs another day of rest before you put weight on her." Kate blinked, surprise flickering across her face. "Another day? Unless you want to risk laming her permanent." Jesse's voice was matter of fact, no judgment in it. "Your choice, but if it were my horse, I'd wait." He opened the door and stepped out into the bright, cold morning, letting in a gust of air that made the fire flicker. Kate sat there for a moment, staring at the closed door. Then she looked around the cabin, really looked this time. One room, two cots, a table with two chairs, a stove, a fireplace, shelves with a few jars and tins, everything worn, patched, used hard, and kept barely functional. This man had nothing, and he'd just offered her another night of what little he had, without asking for anything in return. Outside, Jesse worked with quiet efficiency. He'd already fed both horses, checked their water, and now he was examining the black mare's injured leg in the pale morning light. The swelling had gone down some overnight, but the heat was still there when he pressed his palm to her fetlock. The mare was a fine animal. Good lines, strong build, expensive tack. The saddle alone was worth more than everything Jesse owned. Tooled leather, silver conchos, the kind of craftsmanship you only saw on horses owned by people with money. He ran his hand along her neck, murmuring low, "You're a good girl, aren't you? Followed your lady all the way here. That's loyalty." The mare nickered softly, pushing her nose against his shoulder. Jesse found a loose cinch strap on the saddle and tightened it, then adjusted the stirrups. When he was satisfied everything was sound, he led the mare in a slow circle around the lean-to, watching her gait. She was favoring the right front, but not badly. Another day of rest, and she'd be fine. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Kate stood in the doorway, wrapped in her coat, dry now, hung by the fire all night. Her dark hair was pulled back, and in the morning light, Jesse could see her more clearly than he had before. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe mid-30s. Strong features, the kind that came from good breeding and a life that hadn't been easy despite the money. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of worry, of responsibility carried for too long. "She's ready," Jesse said, leading the mare toward the cabin. "Should get you back to Stillwater without trouble." Kate stepped down off the small porch, running a hand along the mare's neck. The horse whickered, nuzzling her shoulder, and for the first time since she'd woken, Kate's face softened into something like tenderness. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking care of her." Jesse shrugged. "Horse needed tending. Didn't make sense to send you off with loose tack." Kate turned to face him, her gray eyes searching his. Most men would have asked for payment, or at least expected it. I'm not most men. She held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them, an understanding maybe, a recognition of something rare in a world that often felt too hard, too transactional. Kate reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded bill. "Please, let me—" Jesse held up a hand, shaking his head. "Keep it. You'll need it more than me on the road." Kate's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something closer to disbelief. She stood there, the money still in her hand, looking at this man who'd saved her life and wouldn't take a cent for it. Slowly, she tucked the money back into her pocket. "Your mare needs another day," Jesse said, nodding toward the leg. "Stone bruise. Not serious, but she shouldn't carry weight yet. You're welcome to stay until she's sound." Kate blinked. "Another night, if you need it." From inside the cabin, Tommy's voice called out, "Pa, is Miss Kate still here?" Jesse glanced back at the door. "Better come in. Boys probably got breakfast started by now." The second night was different. Tommy had taken to Kate like she was the most interesting thing that had ever walked into his life. He showed her his whittling project, a wooden horse that didn't look much like a horse yet, but the boy was proud of it. Showed her the orange cat, who'd been named Copper on account of his color. Showed her the books he had, 3 of them, worn so thin from reading the pages were almost transparent. Kate sat at the small table, holding one of the books carefully. "Robinson Crusoe," she read from the spine. "You've read this?" Tommy nodded eagerly. 4 times. Pa reads to me at night sometimes when he's not too tired." Kate looked at Jesse, who was stirring beans at the stove, and something shifted in her expression. Not pity, something deeper. Respect, maybe. "What's your favorite part?" she asked Tommy. The boy launched into an animated description of the shipwreck scene, his hands gesturing wildly, his fever from yesterday completely gone. Kate listened like every word mattered, asking questions, smiling at his enthusiasm. Jesse watched from the stove, saying nothing. But I knew him well enough by then to recognize what I was seeing. A man who'd been alone with his son for 6 years, doing his best, wondering if his best was enough. And here was a stranger, a woman he'd pulled from the snow, giving his boy the kind of attention that said, "You matter. Your thoughts matter. You're worth listening to." That night, after Tommy had fallen asleep with Copper curled beside him, Jesse and Kate sat by the fire. The silence between them was comfortable now, not awkward. The kind of silence that comes when two people have moved past the need to fill every moment with words. "How long have you lived here?" Kate asked, breaking the quiet. Jesse poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "Going on 6 years now. Built it myself after—" He paused. "After my wife passed." Kate's gaze softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, the gesture brief. Practiced. Tommy was just 2. Needed a place to raise him. This was all I could afford. "It's honest work," Kate said, glancing around the cabin. "Good work." Jesse's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in something close to pride. "It keeps us fed, keeps us warm. That's all a man can ask for." Kate set her cup down on the small table beside her. "You could ask for more." Jesse met her eyes. "Could? Don't see the point." There was a weight to his words, a quiet resignation that Kate recognized all too well. She'd seen it in the faces of men who worked her land, men who'd stopped dreaming because dreaming hurt too much. "What were you doing out there?" Jesse asked, his voice gentler now. "On Widow's Pass in the middle of a storm?" Kate exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the quilt draped over her legs. "I was heading to Grand Pine Lodge. Had business there. My driver got sick 2 days ago, so I went alone. Thought I could make it before the storm hit." She paused, a bitter smile crossing her lips. "I was wrong." "That trail's no place for a woman alone," Jesse said, not unkindly, just stating a fact. Kate's eyes flashed, just for a moment. "I've ridden worse trails than that. I know how to handle myself." Jesse raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "I'm sure you do. Still doesn't mean the mountain cares." Kate studied him again, longer this time. There was no condescension in his voice, no judgment. Just a plain-spoken truth delivered without malice. It was rare, she realized, to meet someone who spoke without calculation, without an angle. "What do you do?" Tommy had asked her earlier, when Jesse was outside tending the horses. "For work, I mean." Kate had hesitated then, feeling Jesse's presence even though he wasn't in the room. She could tell him the truth, tell him she owned the largest cattle operation in the territory, that she had more land and money than most men would see in 10 lifetimes. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Jesse had looked at her that morning, not seeing wealth or status, just seeing a person who needed help. Maybe it was the relief of being treated like she was ordinary, not like she was Catherine Merrick, the woman who'd spent 15 years proving she could run an empire better than any man. "I run a ranch," she'd said carefully. "Cattle, mostly." "Like the big ones?" Tommy's eyes had lit up. "With hundreds of head?" Kate had smiled despite herself. Something like that. Now, sitting by the fire with Jesse, she felt that same hesitation. Part of her wanted to tell him everything, wanted to see if he'd treat her differently when he knew who she really was. But a larger part of her wanted to hold on to this a little longer, this feeling of being seen for what she'd done, not for what she owned. "Must be nice," Jesse said quietly, leaning back in his chair, "having land like that." There was no envy in his voice, no bitterness, just a quiet observation. Kate felt something twist in her chest. She thought of the sprawling estate in Silver Ridge, the endless pastures, the mansion with more rooms than she could ever use, all of it built through sacrifice and struggle, and 15 years of proving herself to men who didn't think she belonged there. And then she looked around this cabin, small and worn and filled with warmth, and realized which one felt more like home. "It has its challenges," she said softly. Jesse nodded, as if he understood more than she'd said. Everything worth having does. The next morning, Kate prepared to leave. Her mare was sound enough to ride. Jesse had checked her twice before breakfast. The sky was clear, the trail would be passable, and there was no reason to stay longer. Tommy stood on the porch holding Copper, watching as Jesse saddled the black mare. His face was solemn, the way children's faces get when something good is ending. "Will we see you again, Miss Kate?" he asked. Kate knelt down to his level, her eyes meeting his. "I hope so, Tommy." "You could come back," the boy said. "We got extra beans." Kate smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "That's very kind of you." She stood looking at Jesse, who was tightening the cinch on her saddle. He worked with the same methodical care he'd shown everything else, no wasted motion, no shortcuts. When he was satisfied the mare was ready, he led her around front and tied her to the porch rail. "She's good to go," Jesse said simply. "Should get you back to Stillwater without trouble." Kate stepped down off the porch, running her hand along the mare's neck one more time. Then she reached into her coat pocket again, pulled out the folded bill she'd tried to give him yesterday. "Please," she said quietly, "let me—" Jesse held up a hand, shaking his head. "Keep it. You'll need it more than me on the road." Kate's jaw tightened. She stood there, the money still in her hand, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then slowly, deliberately, she tucked the money back into her pocket. "You're a stubborn man, Jesse Dalton." "So I've been told." She mounted her horse with practiced grace, settling into the saddle like she'd been born there. She looked down at Jesse one last time, and something passed between them, something neither of them could quite name. "I won't forget this," Kate said. "What you did, what you didn't ask for." Jesse tipped his hat. "Safe travels, Miss Kate." She turned the mare toward the trail, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "You're a good man," she said. "Better than you know." And then she was gone, riding toward the horizon, leaving nothing behind but hoofprints in the snow and a question Jesse couldn't quite shake. Who was she really? 3 days later, I rode into Stillwater on my regular Thursday route. The town was buzzing. I could feel it the moment I turned onto Main Street, that particular energy that comes when something unusual has happened and everyone's got an opinion about it. I tied my horse outside the general store and went in to deliver Olafson's mail. The Swede was behind the counter, weighing out flour for Lillian Price, who turned the moment I walked in. "Sam," she said, her voice carrying that tone women get when they've got news they're dying to share. "Have you heard?" "Heard what?" "About Jesse Dalton and the woman." I kept my face neutral, setting Olafson's catalog on the counter. "What woman?" Lillian leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret, even though half the town had probably heard this already. "Some rich woman got lost in the storm. Jesse brought her to his cabin. She stayed there. 3 days, Sam. 3 days alone with him and that boy." I'd known this was coming. Known the moment Jesse rode out into that storm with Kate Merrick on his horse that people would talk. The frontier doesn't trust kindness. We're too used to angles, to deals, to ulterior motives. A man helping a stranger for nothing? That seemed like a lie. "Jesse helped someone in a storm," I said mildly. "That's what decent people do." "Decent people bring them to town," Lillian said, her eyes sharp. "They don't take them home, and they especially don't keep them there for 3 days." Olafson, to his credit, said nothing, just kept weighing flour, his face carefully blank. But I could see Mrs. Price wasn't alone in her thinking. 2 other women in the store had stopped their shopping to listen, their faces tight with judgment. "Woman could have frozen to death if he'd tried to make it to town," I said. "Storm was bad, you know that. Storm or no storm, people are talking." Lillian crossed her arms. "And you know what they're saying, Sam. They're saying Jesse's got ideas, that he's trying to profit from this somehow." "Profit how exactly?" I kept my voice even, but I could feel my temper rising. "The man's got nothing. Woman's already gone. What's he supposed to profit?" Lillian didn't have an answer for that. None of them did. But I could see it in their eyes, the suspicion, the certainty that there had to be more to the story than simple decency. I left the store and headed to Harlow's smithy. I found Jesse at the forge, same as always, hammer in hand, working a piece of iron with steady rhythm. But something was different. His jaw was tighter, his movements sharper. "Jesse," I said. He looked up, and I saw it in his face. He knew. "Sam." "People are talking." "I know." Clang, clang, clang. "They're saying things that aren't true." "I know." I waited, but Jesse didn't elaborate, just kept working, shoulders tense, jaw set. Marcus Harlow came out from the back room, saw me, and nodded. "Sam, come to deliver gossip or collect it?" "Neither," I said, "just checking in." Harlow wiped his hands on his apron, glanced at Jesse, then back at me. "People are concerned, Sam. Woman like that, alone with a man like Jesse, it doesn't look right." "Woman like what?" I asked. "Rich, well-bred. You could tell from her horse, her tack. She's not from around here. And Jesse helped her. That's all that happened." "Maybe," Harlow said, "but you know how people think. They're wondering what Jesse's after, whether he's trying to use this somehow." Jesse's hammer came down harder than necessary, sending sparks flying. "I'm not after anything," he said, voice tight. "I helped someone, that's all." "I believe you," Harlow said, "but others don't. And they're my customers, Jesse. I can't—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "I need to reduce your hours, just for a while, until this blows over." Jesse's hand stopped mid-swing. He set the hammer down slowly, turned to face Harlow. "You're cutting my work because I helped someone?" "I'm cutting your work because my customers are uncomfortable," Harlow said. "It's not personal, Jesse. It's business." Jesse stood there for a long moment, and I could see him working through it. Anger warring with resignation, pride warring with necessity. Finally he nodded once. "How many hours?" "Half what you've been getting, for now." Half, which meant half the already meager pay that barely kept Jesse and Tommy fed. Jesse picked up the hammer again. "Understood." I left them there and walked out into the cold December air. That night, I made my notes in the leather journal I kept for my route. I wrote down the deliveries, the road conditions, the weather, and then I wrote something I didn't usually include. Stillwater is wrong about Jesse Dalton, but being right doesn't pay the bills. And Jesse's going to feel this. I didn't know how right I was. 20 miles north, Kate Merrick was having her own reckoning. She'd made it back to Silver Ridge Estate the day after leaving Jesse's cabin. The ride had been long and cold, but uneventful. Her mare had held up fine, and by the time Kate saw the white fences of her property stretching toward the horizon, she felt strong enough to face what was waiting for her. What was waiting was Charles Drummond. Her foreman stood on the front porch of the main house, arms crossed, face tight with barely controlled frustration. Behind him, 3 members of the ranch council, older men who'd worked for her father and still thought they should be running things instead of her. 4 days, Drummond said as Kate dismounted. "You were gone 4 days, Kate. No word, no message. We nearly sent a search party." Kate handed her reins to one of the stable hands and walked up the porch steps, meeting Drummond's eyes without flinching. "My driver got sick. I went alone. Got caught in the storm. A man helped me. Now I'm back." "A man?" Drummond repeated. "What man?" "A blacksmith from Copper Creek. He found me on Widow's Pass, nearly frozen. Took me to his cabin, let me recover. Then I came home." One of the council members, Harrison, a gray-haired man who'd been with her father since the beginning, stepped forward. "You stayed in some stranger's cabin? For 3 days?" "2 nights, Kate corrected. "And yes." "Do you have any idea how that looks?" Harrison's voice rose. "The owner of Merrick Cattle Company, alone with some laborer in the middle of nowhere?" Kate's eyes went cold. "It looks like I survived, which wouldn't have happened if I'd tried to make it to Stillwater in that storm." "You shouldn't have been out there alone in the first place," Drummond said, his voice gentler but no less frustrated. "Kate, you can't keep taking risks like this. The council is already questioning your judgment. This doesn't help." Kate brushed past them and walked into the house. It was grand, that house. 2 stories of polished wood and high ceilings, windows that let in light from every direction, paintings on the walls, carpets from back east, furniture that had cost more than most families made in a year. Her father had built it to make a statement, to show everyone that a man from nothing could create an empire. Kate walked through the foyer, through the dining room with its long table that could seat 20, through the parlor with the fireplace big enough to stand in, and she felt nothing but cold. Drummond followed her into her study, the one room in the house that felt like hers. Maps on the walls showing every acre of Merrick land, ledgers on the desk, tracking every head of cattle, every expense, every dollar earned and spent. "They're going to use this against you," Drummond said quietly, closing the door behind him. "The council. They've been looking for a reason to question your leadership. Now you've handed them one." Kate sank into the chair behind her desk, suddenly exhausted. "Because I survived a blizzard? Because you made a decision that looked reckless, and because—" he hesitated. "Because you're a woman, Kate. They're always going to hold you to a different standard. You know that." She did know that, had known it for 15 years, since her father died, and left her this empire, and every man in the territory waited for her to fail. She'd proven them wrong. Built the ranch into something twice the size her father had managed, made deals other ranchers couldn't make, expanded into markets they couldn't reach. But it had cost her. Kate looked out the window at the vast expanse of land stretching to the mountains, land she owned, land that was supposed to mean something, and all she could think about was a one-room cabin with patched blankets and a man who'd asked for nothing. "I need someone I can trust," she said quietly. Drummond frowned. "You have me. You have the Foreman crew. I need someone who sees people, not profit." Kate turned to face him. "Someone who makes decisions based on what's right, not what's convenient." "Kate, find out everything you can about Jesse Dalton," she said. "Blacksmith. Lives in Copper Creek, about 3 miles from Stillwater. I want to know his history, his reputation, whether he's trustworthy." Drummond stared at her. "You're thinking of hiring him." "I'm thinking of a lot of things." And Kate pulled a piece of paper toward her, picked up her pen. "Just find out who he is." After Drummond left, Kate sat alone in her study. She thought about her father, lying in this very room 15 years ago, fever burning through him, knowing he was dying. "I built this empire, Kate," he'd said, his voice weak but fierce. "But don't let it build you. Don't forget who you are." She'd promised him she wouldn't, but somewhere along the way, she had. She'd become exactly what she'd needed to become to survive in this world. Hard, calculating, measuring every relationship by what it could gain her. Until a man who had nothing had given her everything, asking for nothing in return. Kate pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Back in Stillwater, Jesse was learning what it meant to be right in a world that punished you for it anyway. Harlow's reduction in hours hit hard. Half the work meant half the pay, and Jesse had been operating on the thinnest margin already. Within a week, his careful budgeting started to crumble. Tommy needed new boots. His old ones had holes in the soles, and his feet were growing. Jesse patched them with leather scraps from the smithy, but it wouldn't hold through the winter. The cabin roof started leaking again in the back corner where the shingles had given out. Jesse patched it with tar and whatever he could scavenge, but every rain meant waking up to drips and damp blankets. And then Tommy caught a cold. Not serious, just a winter cough that made him hack through the night and left him weak during the day. But it needed medicine. Honey for his throat, maybe some willow bark tea for the fever. Jesse stood in Olafson's general store, looking at the small bottles of honey on the shelf, 15 cents each. He had 12 cents in his pocket. He put the honey back. That night, Lillian Price knocked on Jesse's door. She stood there on his porch, wrapped in a shawl, holding a jar of honey and a small cloth bag of tea leaves. "Heard Tommy's sick," she said. Jesse looked at the offerings, then at her face. "I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to, not right away." She pressed them into his hands. "But when you get back on your feet, Jesse, you remember who helped." There it was, the transaction, the expectation of return. Jesse took the honey and tea because Tommy needed them more than Jesse needed his pride, but he felt something harden in his chest as he did it. This was the world he knew, the one where nothing came free, where every kindness carried a price tag, where helping someone meant putting them in your debt. Kate Merrick had broken that rule, and it had cost him. 2 weeks after Kate left, Jesse sat alone in his cabin after Tommy had fallen asleep. The fire burned low. He'd been rationing firewood, making each log last as long as possible. The cold pressed in through the gaps in the walls, and Jesse could see his breath in the dim light. He pulled out the small wooden box he kept under his cot. Inside were the only things of value he owned: his wife's wedding ring, a deed to the land the cabin sat on, and a photograph of his family taken the year before she died. Jesse lifted out the ring, held it up to the firelight. Simple gold band, no stones, no decoration. They'd bought it from a peddler for $3, and his wife had worn it every day until the fever took her. He turned it over in his fingers, feeling the weight of it, the weight of the promise he'd made when he'd slipped it on her finger, the weight of the 6 years since. In his head he did the math. The ring would fetch maybe $5, enough to buy Tommy new boots and medicine and food for 2 weeks, enough to keep them going while he figured out what came next. His hand closed around the ring. He sat there for a long time, fire crackling softly. Tommy's breathing steady in the corner. Copper the cat purred somewhere in the darkness. Finally, Jesse opened his hand, looked at the ring one more time, then he put it back in the box, closed the lid, slid it back under the cot. Some things weren't for sale, not even when you were starving, not even when the world was telling you that kindness was a luxury you couldn't afford. Jesse lay back on his cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. He'd done the right thing, pulling Kate from that snow. He knew that, would do it again without hesitation. But right now, in this cold cabin with his son coughing in the corner and his pockets empty and his future narrowing to nothing, right now, it was hard to see what doing right had gotten him, except colder and hungrier and more alone than ever. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Winter had only just begun, and Jesse Dalton had no idea how he was going to make it through to spring. The 3rd week of January brought a cold snap that made December seem gentle by comparison. Temperatures dropped so low, the water in Jesse's bucket froze solid overnight. The horses in Harlow's stable needed double feed just to keep warm, and the few travelers still moving through Stillwater moved quickly, desperate to reach shelter before dark. I rode my route bundled in so many layers I could barely move. The mail was light that week. People weren't writing letters when ink froze in the bottle and paper cracked like kindling. But I still made my rounds. Thursday came, same as always, and I tied my horse outside Harlow's smithy. Jesse wasn't there. I found Harlow in the back, organizing tack. He looked up when I came in, and I saw something in his face, discomfort, maybe guilt. "Where's Jesse?" I asked. "Gave him the week off." Harlow didn't meet my eyes. "Not enough work to justify the pay." Week off meant no pay. We both knew that. I didn't argue, just nodded and headed back out into the cold. I found Jesse at his cabin that afternoon. He was on the roof, hammering new shingles into place. His hands were red and raw from the cold, breath coming out in white clouds. Below, Tommy sat on the porch with Copper in his lap, watching his father work. "Jesse," I called up. "Got a minute?" Jesse looked down, then climbed carefully off the roof. His movements were stiff, not from injury, but from cold and exhaustion and something deeper. The kind of weariness that settles into your bones when you've been fighting too long. "Sam?" He dropped down onto the porch, flexing his fingers to get feeling back into them. "No mail for me, I'm guessing." "Not today." I glanced at Tommy, who was watching us with those wide, serious eyes. "Could we talk? Just us?" Jesse nodded to his son. "Tommy, go inside, warm up by the fire." The boy went without argument, Copper trailing after him. When the door closed, I sat down on the porch step next to Jesse. For a moment, neither of us spoke, just two men sitting in the cold watching the sun drop toward the mountains. "Harlow gave you the week off," I said finally. "He did." "Things tight?" Jesse didn't answer right away. He was looking at his hands, at the cracks in the skin, the scars from years of working hot metal, the calluses that never went away. "We're managing," he said, which was Jesse's way of saying they weren't. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small cloth bag, handed it to him. Jesse took it, felt the weight, looked at me with narrowed eyes. "What's this?" "Flour. A little bit of salt pork. Mrs. Patterson at the way station had extra." It was a lie. I'd bought it myself with my own money. But Jesse's pride was a fierce thing, and sometimes you had to wrap charity in fiction to get a man to accept it. Jesse started to hand it back. "Sam, take it," I said firmly. "For Tommy, not for you." That did it. Jesse's jaw worked for a moment, then he nodded. Set the bag beside him on the porch. "Thank you," he said quietly. We sat there a while longer. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow and pine. "People still talking?" Jesse asked. "Some. Less than before. But enough that Harlow's keeping his distance." I didn't deny it. Frontier towns have long memories for things that make them uncomfortable. Jesse laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I made them uncomfortable by not letting someone freeze to death." "You made them uncomfortable by being better than they expected," I said. "That's a hard thing to forgive." Jesse looked at me, something shifting in his expression. "She asked me why I did it, why I helped her." "What did you tell her?" "That it was the right thing to do." He shook his head. "Don't think she believed me at first, like there had to be more to it." "Maybe there didn't need to be." Jesse picked up a piece of wood from the porch, turned it over in his hands. "My wife made me promise something before she died." I waited. "She said, 'Promise me you'll find happiness again. Don't let grief make you hard.'" His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. I kept the first part, "Didn't let grief make me hard." But the second part, "happiness," I stopped looking for that. Seemed easier to just not hope for things. And now? Now I wonder if maybe she meant something else. Not that I should go looking for happiness, but that I shouldn't refuse it when it shows up. He set the wood down. "Even if it doesn't make sense, even if it scares me." I wasn't sure if he was talking about Kate or something larger, but I didn't ask. We sat there until the sun touched the mountains, painting the snow gold and purple. Then I stood, tipped my hat, and rode back toward Stillwater. Behind me, Jesse stayed on that porch, watching the light fade. And I thought, something's coming. I can feel it. 20 miles north, Kate Merrick was fighting her own battle. The ranch council had called an emergency meeting. They sat around the long table in the main house, 5 men who'd built their lives on Merrick land, who'd served her father loyally, and who thought that loyalty gave them the right to question her. Charles Drummond sat at Kate's right hand, his face carefully neutral. He'd brought her the information she'd asked for about Jesse Dalton, and it sat in a folder in front of her now. She hadn't opened it yet. Harrison, the gray-haired man who'd been with her father longest, led the charge. "We're concerned, Catherine," he said, using her full name the way he did when he wanted to remind her she was young, inexperienced, emotional. "The Copper Creek expansion requires significant capital, and you're talking about hiring a man none of us know to oversee it." "I'm not talking about it," Kate said calmly. "I'm telling you that's what I'm doing." Another council member, Bosworth, who ran the breeding program, leaned forward. "You met this man once, in a crisis. That's not enough information to make a hiring decision of this magnitude." "I've seen enough." "You've seen him help someone in a storm," Harrison said. "That's admirable, Catherine, but it doesn't qualify him to run a cattle operation." Kate opened the folder. Inside were 3 pages of Charles Drummond's neat handwriting. She'd read it all twice already, but she scanned it again now, letting the silence build. Jesse Dalton, age 38. Widower, 1 son, Thomas, age 8. Works as blacksmith in Stillwater under Marcus Harlow. owned small horse ranch with wife before her death, sold it to pay medical debts, purchased current land in Copper Creek from estate sale, built cabin himself. Known locally as honest, hard-working, keeps to himself. No debts beyond normal credit at general store, no legal troubles, respected but not well-liked, maintains distance from community. Son is bright, well-mannered, despite lack of formal schooling. And then at the bottom, in Drummond's hand, background check with Stillwater residence yields consistent picture. Dalton is exactly what he appears to be. Make of that what you will. Kate closed the folder. He's qualified because he makes decisions based on what's right, not what's profitable, she said. Because he sees people, not resources. Because when faced with a choice between self-preservation and helping someone, he chose to help. That's sentiment, not business sense, Harrison said. Is it? Kate met his eyes. Father built this ranch on his word, on people trusting that when he made a deal, he'd honor it. That's not sentiment, that's the foundation everything else is built on. Your father also knew when to be hard, Bosworth said, when to put business first. And he also knew when to trust people everyone else dismissed, Kate shot back. How many men in this room did he hire despite others telling him not to? That landed. Harrison's jaw tightened. He'd been one of those men, a ranch hand with no experience that Kate's father had promoted to foreman over more qualified candidates. This is different, Harrison said. Why? Because I'm the one making the decision? Kate stood, placing her palms flat on the table. I'm offering Jesse Dalton the position of foreman for Copper Creek operations. Salary of $120 a month, housing on the property, educational provisions for his son, and a partnership stake in the expansion, 5% of profits after costs. The room erupted. A partnership? Bosworth's voice rose. Catherine, you can't be serious. You're giving away equity to a stranger? Harrison was on his feet now. On what grounds? On the grounds that I need someone I can trust absolutely, Kate said, her voice cutting through the noise. Someone who won't sell me out the moment a better offer comes along. Someone who values loyalty more than money. You don't know that he's that person, Drummond said quietly. Kate looked at him. Yes, I do. The room fell silent. I watched him risk his life and his son's safety to save mine, Kate continued. I watched him give me his food when he didn't have enough to spare. I watched him refuse payment even though he's barely surviving. And I watched him look at me like I was a person, not a transaction. Her voice dropped. You want to know why I'm doing this? Because in 15 years of running this ranch, I've forgotten what that feels like. And I need someone who remembers. Harrison shook his head slowly. This is a mistake, Catherine. And if it fails? If it fails, it's mine to own, Kate said. Same as every other decision I've made since Father died. She gathered her papers and walked out. That night, Kate sat alone in her study. The house was quiet. The staff had retired for the evening, and the only sound was the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Kate pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, picked up her pen. For a long moment she just sat there, the blank page in front of her. What was she really doing? Was this a business decision, like she'd told the council, or was it something else, something deeper and more complicated? She thought about her father, about the promise she'd made him. Don't let it build you. Don't forget who you are. She'd forgotten. Somewhere in the years of fighting to prove herself, of making every decision with cold calculation, of measuring every relationship by what it could gain her, she'd lost the part of herself that knew how to trust without a contract. Jesse Dalton had reminded her that part still existed. Kate set pen to paper and began to write. Dear Jesse, I've thought about that night every day since I left your doorstep. She paused, crossed it out. Too personal. Start again. Dear Mr. Dalton, I hope this letter finds you and Thomas well. Too formal. This wasn't a business letter, even if that's what she was pretending it was. Kate crumpled the paper, pulled out a fresh sheet. Dear Jesse, I've thought about that night every day since I left your doorstep, about the way you didn't hesitate, about the way you looked at me, not as a stranger, not as a burden, but simply as someone who needed help. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what I could give you. You just acted, and in doing so, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Decency isn't a transaction. It's a choice. Kate stopped, read what she'd written. It was true, every word. She continued, "My name is Catherine Merrick. I own the Merrick Cattle Company, the largest ranch operation in Red Bluff Territory. I built it from what my father left me, and I've spent 15 years proving I could run it better than any man who doubted me. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of why I started. I became cold, calculating. I measured every relationship by what it could gain me. You asked for nothing. You expected nothing. And yet you gave me everything." Kate set down her pen, stared at the words on the page. This was the truth she'd been avoiding. The thing that made her counsel uncomfortable, that made this decision seem reckless. She wasn't hiring Jesse because he was the most qualified. She was hiring him because he'd shown her who she used to be, who she could be again, if she had someone around who remembered what values looked like when they weren't calculated. She picked up the pen again. "I won't insult you with charity, but I would like to offer you something you've earned through your character, not your circumstance. I'm expanding operations into Copper Creek. I need a foreman to oversee the new stables and livestock management. The position comes with a salary of $120 a month, housing on the property, and provisions for Thomas's schooling. But more than that, I'm offering you a partnership, a 5% stake in the expansion's profits. A chance to build something meaningful, not for me, but with me. I need someone I can trust, someone who sees people, not profit, someone like you. If you're willing, the job is yours." Kate signed it, sealed it, pressed her family's crest into the red wax. Then she called for her assistant. "I need this delivered to Jesse Dalton in Copper Creek," she said, "personally, and I need you to wait for his answer." The young man took the letter, nodded, and left. Kate sat back in her chair, suddenly exhausted. She'd just offered a partnership to a man she'd known for 2 days, had given him equity in her expansion based on nothing but the conviction that character mattered more than credentials. The council would fight her on this. Some of them would probably resign, but Kate had spent 15 years making safe decisions, calculated decisions, decisions based on protecting what her father had built. Maybe it was time to make a decision based on building something new. I was at the way station when Kate's assistant found me. Young fellow, well-dressed, riding a chestnut gelding that was worth more than I made in a year. He introduced himself as William, personal aide to Miss Merrick, and asked if I knew the way to Jesse Dalton's cabin. "I do," I said, "but I'm headed to Stillwater tomorrow. I can take it." William shook his head. Miss Merrick was specific. Personal delivery. She's paid me to see it done. I respected that. Showed him the trail to Copper Creek, gave him directions to Jesse's cabin, watched him ride off into the gray afternoon. But I was curious. More than curious. I had a feeling in my gut that this was it. The thing I'd been sensing was coming. So the next morning, I adjusted my route. Rode through Copper Creek on my way to Stillwater, arriving at Jesse's cabin around midday. What I found there would change everything. Jesse stood outside his cabin, letter in hand. He'd read it 3 times now. Each time the words seemed more impossible. Catherine Merrick, owner of Merrick Cattle Company, the woman he'd pulled from the snow, the woman who'd eaten beans from a chipped bowl and slept on a cot with patched blankets, the woman who'd looked at his tiny cabin and said it was honest work. She was one of the wealthiest people in the territory, and she was offering him a job. No, more than a job. A partnership. $120 a month. More money than Jesse had seen in his entire life combined. Housing, schooling for Tommy, a future. William, the young man who delivered the letter, stood a respectful distance away, holding his horse's reins. "Miss Merrick asked me to wait for your response," he said, "if you're inclined to give one." Jesse looked up at him, then back at the letter. His hands were trembling, not from cold, from something bigger, something that felt like hope and terror all mixed together. "She's serious about this?" Jesse heard himself ask. "Miss Merrick doesn't make offers she doesn't intend to keep," William replied. That's when I rode up. Jesse turned, saw me, and something in his face shifted. Relief, maybe, or the need to talk to someone who knew him, who'd understand what he was feeling. "Sam," he said. I dismounted, nodded to William, then looked at Jesse. "What's going on?" Jesse handed me the letter. I read it slowly, taking in every word. And I'll admit, even knowing Kate was someone important, even suspecting this might be coming, the actual words on that page made my breath catch. This wasn't a thank you. This was a life-changing offer. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Jesse took the letter back, folded it carefully. "I don't know." "Don't know?" I stared at him. "Jesse, this is everything. This is the answer to everything you've been struggling with." "Is it?" His voice was quiet. "Or is it charity dressed up to look like something else?" There it was, the thing I'd been worried about. Jesse's pride, the thing that had kept him going through 6 years of barely surviving, was now the thing that might make him refuse the one chance he had to give his son a real future. "It's not charity," I said firmly. "You read the letter. She's offering you a partnership because of who you are, not because she feels sorry for you. A partnership with someone she met for 2 days. Jesse shook his head. "Sam, people don't do that. Not in the real world. There has to be more to it." "Maybe there is," I said. "Maybe she needs someone she can trust, and you proved you're that person. Maybe that's worth more to her than all the experience in the world." Jesse looked at the cabin behind him, at the patched roof, the worn steps, the smoke trickling from the chimney. Everything he'd built with his own hands. Everything that represented his independence, his self-sufficiency, his refusal to ask for help. "If I say yes," he said slowly, "I'm admitting I can't do this alone, that I need her." "You do need her," I said. "Same as she needs you. That's not weakness, Jesse. That's partnership." He didn't answer, just stood there, holding that letter, war playing out across his face. William cleared his throat. "Mr. Dalton, I don't mean to press, but Miss Merrick is waiting. If you'd like time to consider, tell her I need to think about it," Jesse said. William nodded, mounted his horse, and rode off. When he was gone, I turned to Jesse. "What's there to think about?" "Everything," Jesse said, and then he walked back into his cabin and closed the door. That night, Father Andreas Kohler arrived in Stillwater. He was an old German priest who traveled a circuit through the territory, visiting isolated communities that didn't have permanent churches. Tall, white-haired, with eyes that saw more than most people wanted them to see. I was having dinner at Lillian's boarding house when he came in, shaking snow from his coat. We greeted each other. I'd known him for years, and he joined me at the table. "Cold night," he said in his accented English. "They all are, this time of year." He ordered coffee, wrapped his hands around the cup when it came. "I heard an interesting story in town today, about a man who saved a stranger in a storm and is now facing judgment for it." I wasn't surprised. Word had reached him. "Jesse Dalton." "Yes, you know him?" "I do." Kohler nodded slowly. "I would like to speak with him. Would you show me the way?" We rode to Jesse's cabin the next morning. Jesse was outside, chopping wood. He stopped when he saw us coming, axe in hand, breath white in the cold air. "Jesse," I said, "this is Father Kohler. He wanted to meet you." Jesse set down the axe, wiped his hands on his trousers. "Father." Kohler dismounted, approached Jesse with the slow deliberateness of an old man who'd learned not to rush anything. "I heard what you did," Kohler said. "Saving the woman in the storm." Jesse's jaw tightened. "Everyone's heard by now." "I also heard about the offer she made you." Jesse shot me a look. I shrugged. Small towns had no secrets. "I haven't decided yet," Jesse said. "Why not?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Jesse off guard. He looked at Kohler, then at me, then back at the priest. "Because I don't know if I can accept it," he said finally. "Feels like Taking something I didn't earn. Kohler smiled, a small, knowing expression. You earned it the moment you pulled her from that snow, not because you expected payment, but because you didn't. That's what Sam said. Then perhaps you should listen. Kohler moved closer. Jesse, may I ask you something? What are you afraid of? The question hung in the cold air. I'm afraid I'll fail her, Jesse said quietly. That I'm not good enough. That I don't know enough. That I'll take this opportunity and waste it. Kohler nodded. And what if you succeed? Jesse blinked. What? What if you accept this offer and you're exactly what she needs? What if your son gets the education he deserves and you build something meaningful and you honor your wife's memory by living fully instead of just surviving? Kohler's voice was gentle but firm. Are you afraid of that too? Jesse didn't answer. Grace isn't about being good enough, Jesse, Kohler continued. It's about being willing. This woman sees something in you that you don't see in yourself. The question isn't whether you deserve it. The question is, are you brave enough to accept it? Jesse stood there for a long time after Kohler and I left. He thought about his wife, about the promise he'd made her. Find happiness again. Don't let grief make you hard. He'd kept half that promise. Hadn't let grief make him hard. Hadn't become bitter or cruel. But he'd stopped looking for happiness. Stopped believing it was something he could have. Maybe Kate's offer wasn't charity. Maybe it was just life finally giving him permission to hope again. That night, Jesse sat at his small table with a piece of paper and a pencil. He wrote 2 letters. The first was a refusal, polite, grateful, explaining that while he appreciated the offer, he couldn't accept something that felt unearned. He read it over. It was good, safe. It protected his pride. Then he crumpled it up and threw it in the fire. The second letter was shorter, just 3 words. I accept. He stared at those words for a long time. Then he folded the paper, put it in his pocket, and went to check on Tommy. The boy was asleep, copper curled against his side. In the dim firelight, Tommy looked peaceful, young, full of potential that was being wasted in this tiny cabin, in this life of just barely getting by. Jesse had promised his wife he'd take care of their boy, give him more than they'd had. This was how he kept that promise. Jesse went back to the table, pulled out the letter, and added one more line below, I accept. When do we start? I carried Jesse's letter to Kate myself, rode the 20 miles to Silver Ridge Estate on a clear February morning, the kind where the cold is sharp, but the sun makes everything look polished. The snow had that crust on top that crunched under the horses' hooves, and you could see your breath for miles. When I reached the Merrick property, I understood why the council had been worried. The main house sat on a rise, white paint gleaming in the sunlight, windows reflecting the mountains behind it. White fences stretched in every direction, marking pastures where hundreds of cattle grazed. Barns, stables, bunkhouses, all of it organized with the precision of someone who'd built an empire from intention, not luck. I was stopped at the gate by a ranch hand who asked my business. Letter for Miss Merrick, I said. From Jesse Dalton. The man's eyebrows went up. He sent someone running to the house, and within minutes, Kate herself came down the path. She looked different here, not in the clothes. She still wore a simple riding outfit, practical boots, but in the way she carried herself, like the land was hers, and she knew every inch of it. Mr. Brenner, she said, recognizing me, you have something for me? I handed her the letter. She opened it right there, standing in the cold, and I watched her face as she read those few words. I accept. When do we start? Something shifted in her expression. Relief, maybe, or vindication. She folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest for just a moment. Tell him, she said quietly, to come when he's ready. Bring Thomas. I'll have housing prepared. Yes, ma'am. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen the first time we'd met. A question. You think this is a mistake? She asked. No, ma'am, I said. I think it's the bravest thing either of you have done. Kate smiled. Small but genuine. So do I. Jesse and Tommy rode out of Copper Creek on a Thursday morning. I was there to see them off. So was half of Stillwater, though most of them watched from windows and doorways rather than coming out to say goodbye. Harlow stood on the porch of his smithy, arms crossed. When Jesse led Dust past, the older man nodded once. Jesse nodded back. No words, but something passed between them. An acknowledgement, maybe, or a release. Lillian Price came out of her boarding house as Jesse and Tommy passed. She pressed a small package into Tommy's hands, sandwiches wrapped in cloth, still warm. "For the road," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Price," Tommy said, his voice serious and polite. Jesse met her eyes. "I'll pay back what I owe." "I know you will," Lillian said, and there was something softer in her face now. "Good luck, Jesse." They rode south, out of Stillwater, toward the mountains where Silver Ridge waited. I rode with them, not because they needed an escort, but because I wanted to see it, wanted to be there when these two worlds finally came together properly. The journey took most of the day. We stopped once at midday to rest the horses and eat Lillian's sandwiches. Tommy was quiet, but his eyes were bright with excitement and fear, all mixed together. "You scared, son?" Jesse asked him. Tommy thought about it. "A little." "Me too." The boy looked at his father, surprised. "Really?" "Really." Jesse put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "But being scared just means it matters, and that's all right." As we got closer to Silver Ridge, the landscape changed. The rough, wild country around Stillwater gave way to ordered pastures, managed land, the visible hand of someone who'd shaped the wilderness into something productive. Tommy saw the white fences first. "Pa," he breathed. "Look." Jesse looked. And I saw something cross his face, not fear exactly, but a kind of reckoning. This was real. He was really doing this. The main house came into view, and Tommy actually gasped. "Is that where we're going to live?" "No, son," Jesse said quietly. "We'll have our own place. Miss Kate mentioned housing for the foreman." But even as he said it, I could see Jesse struggling with the scale of it all. This wasn't just bigger than what he'd known. It was a different world entirely. Kate was waiting on the porch when we arrived. She'd changed into a dress, still simple, still practical. But there was no mistaking who she was here. This was her land, her house, her empire. Jesse dismounted first, then lifted Tommy down. The boy stood close to his father, eyes wide, taking in everything. Kate came down the steps slowly, and for a moment she and Jesse just looked at each other. Two people who'd met in a storm, who'd sat by a fire in a one-room cabin, now standing in front of a mansion that made that cabin look like a shed. "You came," Kate said. "You asked," Jesse replied, the same exchange they'd had before, but this time it felt like a promise being kept. Kate's eyes dropped to Tommy. "And you must be Thomas." Tommy ducked his head, suddenly shy. "Yes, ma'am, but everyone calls me Tommy." "Tommy, then." Kate smiled. "There's a library inside, 300 books. You're welcome to read any of them." Tommy's eyes went so wide I thought they might fall out of his head. He looked up at Jesse, disbelief and joy warring on his face. Jesse nodded. "Go on." Tommy took off running toward the house. Copper, who'd been riding in Jesse's saddlebag, bounded after him, orange tail high. When they were gone, Kate turned back to Jesse. The smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "I meant what I said in the letter," she said. "This isn't charity. You earned this." Jesse shook his head slowly. "I just did what anyone should have done. But most wouldn't have," Kate said quietly. "That's the difference. That's why you're here." Jesse looked out at the land, at the vastness of it, the scope of what he was being asked to step into, then back at Kate. "I'm going to fail sometimes," he said. "I don't know everything about running an operation this size. I'm going to make mistakes." "Good," Kate said. "That means you're human. I've had enough people around me who pretend they know everything." She gestured toward the property. "Come, let me show you what we're building." They walked together, and I followed at a respectful distance. Kate pointed out the existing stables, the cattle pens, the land that stretched toward Copper Creek where the expansion would happen. "The foreman quarters are there," she said, indicating a small house near the main stables. "2 bedrooms, kitchen, fireplace. It's yours for as long as you're here." Jesse looked at the house, small by this property's standards, but 3 times the size of his cabin. "And the school?" he asked. "In town, 5 miles east. I've already spoken to the teacher. Tommy can start whenever he's ready." Kate paused. "I'll pay his tuition, and if he wants to go on to university someday, that's covered too." Jesse's throat worked. "That's too much." "It's an investment," Kate said firmly, "in the future, in the kind of person I think he'll become." They walked in silence for a while, boots crunching through snow. Then Kate stopped, turned to face him fully. "Jesse, I need you to understand something. I didn't offer you this position because I felt sorry for you. I offered it because I need someone who makes decisions the way you do. Someone who sees what's right and does it, even when it's hard, even when it costs something." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "Charles, my foreman, he did research on you. Background, history, everything." Jesse's jaw tightened. "And?" "And he found exactly what I expected. A man who keeps his word, who pays his debts, who raised his son alone and did a damn good job of it." Kate handed him the paper. "But there's something else in there, something I didn't know until yesterday." Jesse unfolded it, scanned down to where Kate was pointing. "Land deed, Copper Creek, Plot 47, purchased from Merrick Estate Sale, 1886. He looked up at her, confused. "My father owned that land," Kate said quietly. "He sold it cheap to settlers, people who needed a place to build a life, not investors looking to profit. He said he wanted it to go to someone who'd use it right." Jessie stared at the paper, then at Kate. "You've been connected to my family for 6 years," she said. "My father helped give you the land to build your cabin, and now you're helping me build something here." She smiled, small but genuine. "It's not fate, Jesse, it's just continuation. My father saw something in you without ever meeting you, and I see it too." Jesse's hands shook slightly as he refolded the paper. "I didn't know. I know. That's what makes it mean something." Kate extended her hand. "Partners?" Jesse looked at her hand, at this woman who'd taken a risk on him based on nothing but character, who'd looked past his poverty and his lack of credentials and seen something worth investing in. He took her hand, his calloused palm against hers. "Partners," he said. That was February 1892. By March, Jesse had moved into the foreman's house with Tommy. The boy started school and took to it like he'd been starving for it, which, in a way, he had been. By April, the Copper Creek expansion was underway. Jesse hired a crew, organized the work, and I watched him grow into the role like he'd been preparing for it his whole life without knowing it. By summer, the first cattle were moved to the new pastures. The operation was turning a profit. And somewhere in all of that, something else happened. Something quieter, but just as important. Jesse and Kate became friends, not in a romantic way, at least not then, not in those first years, but in the way 2 people become friends when they've seen each other at their worst and their best, and decided they want to keep showing up for each other. I saw it in small moments. Kate asking Jesse's advice on a business decision, then actually listening. Jesse bringing Tommy to the main house for dinner, the 3 of them talking late into the evening. Kate teaching Tommy to read Latin. Jesse teaching Kate how to shoe a horse properly. The ranch council grumbled at first. Harrison resigned, as I'd expected, but Drummond stayed, and eventually he came around. Hard to argue with success, and Jesse's management of Copper Creek was nothing short of remarkable. Stillwater eventually stopped talking too, or at least they stopped talking about it like it was a scandal. Sometimes people just need time to accept that the world can surprise them in good ways. And now I'm going to tell you what happened next, because that young reporter sitting across from me in 1906 is leaning forward, pencil ready, waiting for the ending he came here to get. So they succeeded, he says. The partnership worked. It did, I say. The Merrick-Dalton Cattle Company is the largest operation in the territory now, maybe the largest in 3 territories. And Mr. Dalton, is he still foreman? Partner, I correct him. Full partner. They restructured the company 5 years ago. Equal ownership, equal say in decisions. The reporter writes that down, excited. This is the story he wanted, the rags to riches tale, the frontier legend. But that's not the real story. What about the son? He asks. Thomas? I smile. Tommy's studying law at the university in Denver. Kate's paying for it. Says it's an investment in the future. He's top of his class. And Miss Merrick? Did she ever marry? No, I say. Neither did Jessie. Though there's talk they might someday. I pause. But that's their business, not ours. The reporter finishes writing, looks up. It's quite a story, Mr. Brenner. The kind people will tell for generations. Maybe, I say, but you're missing the point. He blinks. Sir? I lean back in my chair, look out the window at Stillwater. Still the same rough town it was 15 years ago, just a little older, a little more weathered. The point isn't that Jesse went from poverty to wealth, I say. It's that he didn't change who he was when he got there. The point isn't that Kate found someone to help run her ranch. It's that she found someone who reminded her why the ranch mattered in the first place. I pull something from my pocket, a small object wrapped in cloth. Unwrap it slowly. It's the wax seal from Kate's letter, the one with the Merrick crest pressed into red wax. She gave it to me years ago, said I was part of the story too. I carried thousands of letters in my time, I say, running my thumb over the wax. Birth announcements, death notices, land deeds, business contracts. Most of them were just transactions, words on paper moving from one place to another. I look at the reporter. But some letters carry more than words. They carry hope, they carry change, they carry the possibility that the world might be better than we think it is. The reporter is writing this down, but I can tell he doesn't really understand. He's young, he will someday. Jesse Dalton pulled a woman from the snow because it was the right thing to do, I continue. Not because he expected anything, not because he knew who she was. Just because a person needed help and he could give it. I wrap the seal back up, tuck it away. And Catherine Merrick saw that, and she understood what it meant. That character matters more than credentials. That trust is built in moments when no one's watching. That sometimes the best investments aren't in land or cattle, they're in people who know how to do right. The reporter sets down his pencil. That's beautiful, Mr. Brenner. I'll make sure to include it in the article. Don't, I say. He looks surprised. Sir, don't include it. Don't write this up like it's some fairy tale about a poor man and a rich woman finding each other. I shake my head. Write it like it was. Two people who were struggling, just in different ways, who found something in each other that helped them both become better than they were alone. I stand, my old bones creaking. And if you want to write something that matters, write this. The frontier is hard. It makes people hard too, makes us suspicious of kindness, afraid to hope for more than survival. But every now and then, someone comes along who reminds us that we can be better than that we can help each other without expecting payment, that we can trust without contracts, that we can build something together that neither of us could build alone. The reporter stands too. Is that what happened with Mr. Dalton and Miss Merrick? I look out the window one more time, at the mountains in the distance, at the snow starting to fall again. That's what happened, I say. And 15 years later, they're still building it, still partners, still proving that sometimes doing what's right when nobody's watching is the only credential that matters. The reporter left that evening, headed back to Denver with his notes and his story. I don't know if he'll write it the way I told him to. Probably not. People like clean narratives, happy endings, the promise that goodness always gets rewarded. But I know the truth. Goodness doesn't always get rewarded. Jesse could have pulled Kate from that snow and still ended up poor and struggling. Kate could have written that letter and Jesse could have refused it, too proud to accept help. The world doesn't guarantee happy endings just because you do the right thing. But sometimes, just sometimes, it does. And when it does, it's worth remembering, worth telling the story, worth passing it down. Because the next time someone's faced with a choice between doing what's easy and doing what's right, maybe they'll remember Jesse Dalton in a blizzard. Maybe they'll remember Catherine Merrick writing a letter that changed 2 lives. Maybe they'll choose differently because of it. That's all stories are for, in the end, reminding us who we could be, if we had the courage. I'm an old man now. 62 years old, weak heart, not many winters left. But I got to see something most people don't. I got to see what happens when 2 people decide to trust each other in a world that tells them not to. I got to deliver the letter that made it possible. And I got to watch over 15 years as they built something that proved the world wrong. The Merrick-Dalton Cattle Company stands as proof that partnerships built on character last longer than partnerships built on contracts. That investments in people pay dividends that can't be measured in dollars. That sometimes the best thing you can do is help someone without asking what you'll get in return. Jesse still lives in that foreman's house, though they've added on to it over the years. Tommy comes home from university every summer, helps with the cattle drives, talks about the law like it's poetry. Kate still runs the ranch, but now she's got someone beside her who tells her the truth even when it's hard. Someone who remembers what values look like when they're not calculated. And me? I retired from the mail route last year. Hands got too stiff for the rains, heart too weak for the cold. But I kept that wax seal, the one from Kate's letter. Sometimes I take it out, turn it over in my hands, remember the day I delivered it. Remember the look on Jesse's face when he read it. Remember thinking, something's about to change. And it did. Not because of fate, not because of luck. Because 2 people made choices that honored what was best in each other. And they kept making those choices day after day, year after year, until those choices became a life. That's the real story, not the one the newspapers will print or the dime novels will sell, but it's the one worth telling. They say in Red Bluff territory there are 3 kinds of storms: the kind that bring rain, the kind that bring snow, and the kind that bring change. Winter of 1891 brought all 3. And I was there to see it. Some storms destroy everything in their path. But some storms deliver exactly what you need, exactly when you need it most. You just have to be willing to ride into them, and you have to be brave enough to help the person you find on the other side.